It was not an orc. It was no race Daneth had ever seen before. The figure was tall and broad-shouldered, with pale blue skin that nearly glowed in the dim torchlight. Its features were strong and noble, similar to an elf's but more rugged, with smaller pointed ears and wide slanting eyes. A row of ridged plates covered the figure's high forehead, ending just above the stern brow, and thick tentacles hung down from the jaw on either side of the small tufted beard. Silver hair swept back around the head and fell beyond the shoulders of the stranger's richly brocaded but heavily worn robes, and he held a long, ornate staff in one hand. Cloven hooves emerged below the robe's frayed hem. Daneth saw, and a sweep of motion behind them told him this figure had a tail as well. The figure spoke in a deep, smooth voice, raising the staff before him, and its tip flared with a pale violet light that reflected in its eyes. The eyes caught sight of Grizek, who was cowering behind Daneth, and they narrowed. He spoke again in angry tones, and Grizek replied in the same language. "What is this creature? What does it want?" Daneth barked at Grizek. "He certainly doesn't seem happy to see you." "I tell him, I lead noble warriors here, that's all." The being turned toward them again and impaled Daneth with his gaze. Then he murmured something, and his staff glowed yet again. He opened his eyes and spoke in perfect common. "This creature tells me he leads you here. What are you, and what is your goal here, among the revered dead?" Daneth lowered his shield and sheathed his sword, shocked that the other knew his language, but caring more about convincing him to let them pass than in finding out how he learned it. "I apologize for the intrusion," he told the stranger. "We would not disturb your dead or yourself, but the orcish horde has taken refuge in their tunnels and has captured our friend. We seek to rescue him and defeat them as well." The being, Daneth assumed it was some sort of Draenei, since Grizek had said this was their temple, glared at the mention of the horde, but nodded when Daneth had finished. "Yes, the orcs have invaded our tunnels," he confirmed, lowering his staff to rest its base upon the floor. "They have laid claim to the Shadow Labyrinth, the deepest part of Octuin, and the least damaged. It is there they will have taken your friend, and there you will find the majority of the horde forces." "The majority?" Daneth asked, leaning forward eagerly. "Some of the orcs did not arrive recently," the Draenei said. "They have been here for some years, since just before the explosion. They reside within a different tunnel." He shook his head, a mixture of anger and grief on his noble features. "They have sullied this temple with their presence for far too long." "We'll soon fix that," Daneth assured him. "You have told me your purpose. Now tell me what manner of creature you are. Many places I have traveled, but I have never seen your like before." "I am human," Daneth replied. "We hail from Azeroth, another world. The orcs forged a portal between there and Draenor and invaded, but we have broken their army and pushed them back. Now we seek to seal the portal once and for all, to protect our home and our people." The Draenei studied him, those large eyes unblinking, and Daneth knew the stranger was somehow testing the truth of his words. At last he nodded. "That is a noble goal," he stated, and stepped out of the doorway to stand before Daneth. "I am Nimeran, one of the last of the Akanai," he introduced himself. "We were the priests of our people, and cared for the dead here in Auchenduin." Daneth introduced himself, and Talthrassar and both bowed slightly. "I applaud your determination, both in rescuing your friend and in removing the Horde's taint," Nemoran continued. "I can help with both your tasks, if you will allow it." "I'd be grateful," Daneth answered honestly. He showed the Akanai the rough map Grizik had sketched out. "This is all I know of Akanduin." Nemoran examined the crude drawing and chuckled, though it was a bitter sound. "Did that one draw this for you then?" he asked, indicating the Eric Koa with a quick jerk of his tentacled chin. Grizik was no longer cowering, though he was carefully staying back among the Alliance warriors. Daneth noted, "He has been prowling through our halls for years." The Akanai continued after Daneth nodded, "But he knows little beyond where to search for items to steal." "I meant no harm," Grizik protested. "I not know anyone remained within Akanduin. I never have taken anything if I'd thought." "If you thought you'd get caught?" Nemoran interrupted. "Be careful with this one," he warned Daneth. "The Eric Koa were ever a devious race, and a selfish one." "He has been true to his word thus far," Daneth replied, "and I believe him when he says he hates the Horde." "Yes," Grizik agreed fervently, his dark eyes glittering. "I hate them all. Please, please, we have common enemy." "That we do," Nemoran admitted for a moment. "Very well, Eric Koa. We will start fresh as of this moment." The Akanai turned back to Daneth, taking the parchment from his hand and producing a small black stick from a fold in his robes. With several quick marks, he altered a few lines, linked a few tunnels, and expanded the map considerably. "The orcs will be here," he explained, indicating one section. "Come, I will lead you to them." Without another word, Nemoran thrust the map back at Daneth and turned away, starting back up the stairs, his hooves clopping on the stone floor. Daneth glanced at Talthrassar and Relian, who nodded. He took a deep breath and followed the Draenei into Akanduin. "Have you lived here by yourself all these years?" he asked softly as Nemoran led them into a second wide hallway and then through a series of twisting corridors. "There are others," Akanai replied, his staff raised to light the way. "Several of us survived the Horde's attack and fled into the tunnels. Other Draenei joined us later, seeking refuge from the Horde's sudden onslaught. Many of them died in the explosion, and others have been lost since. Only a handful of us remain." Daneth glanced around, wondering where these others might be. But ahead of him, Nemoran shook his head. "You will not see them. Though you seem noble and true, it would not be wise for me to put the rest of my people at risk. They will remain hidden while I aid you, so that if you do betray me, our race will yet continue." "A wise precaution," Daneth agreed. "I'd have done the same." They continued to walk for some time, finally stopping at another door. "This marks the start of the Shadow Labyrinth," Nemoran explained. "Behind it lies the Horde." He turned and studied Daneth closely, his face somber, yet his eyes alight with anticipation? Joy? "I would aid you further, if you'll permit it," he offered softly, "though I warn that the type of aid might prove unsettling to some." Daneth frowned and raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" The Akanai bowed his head. "In my keeping are the souls of all our departed," he explained humbly, hands clasped on his staff. "At times of great need, I may call upon them. I would do so now. They would relish the chance to cleanse these halls of the orc's foul touch." Daneth was a little shaken at the matter-of-factness with which this was presented. He knew the Horde's Death Knights were orc spirits placed in human bodies, so clearly spirits could survive beyond death, although he'd always been taught The dead should be left to rest at peace. But Nemeron was a protector of the dead. It would be all right if he asked for their help, wouldn't it? Daneth had said to Cheralion earlier that the ghosts of the men who had fallen would fight with him when they found the orcs, but he'd been speaking metaphorically. It looked as though the ghosts of someone's fallen took such comments literally. Finally, Daneth shrugged. Such questions were for those of a more esoteric mindset, and from a military standpoint, he could certainly use all the help they could get. I am honored, he told Nemeron, and if it would not disturb or anger them, we would welcome their assistance. Nemeron nodded and bowed deeply, clearly pleased with Daneth's reply, then straightened and raised his staff high. Violet light blossomed down the length of the hallway, filling it with light and awakening answering gleams all along the ceiling. These gleams grew brighter rather than dimming, their colors shifting from violet to blue to green to gold as they descended and expanded, gaining shape and definition. The one nearest Daneth and Nemeron altered to reveal a massive figure, clearly a Draenei, but burlier than Nemeron, and wearing ornate plate armor rather than robes. A giant warhammer across one shoulder, and a long cape trailing behind him. Others came into crisp focus as well, filling the room. And they were all staring at Daneth and his men. A wind sprung out of nowhere, rustling Daneth's cape, stirring Talrasar's long hair. A deep coldness seized Daneth, and he began to shiver uncontrollably. The spectral warriors advanced, beautiful and implacable, and Daneth was rooted to the spot in sudden terror. Their leader extended a hand and brushed Daneth's forehead with it. The human cried out as images filled his mind. Young Farrell and Van in the stables before departing. Van's words cut off as an orb club had silenced him forever. Crouching low over his horse, living so the dead could know peace. Sky Ree, returning riderless, bodies, so many of them. My boys, I'm sorry, so sorry. The image of the horde, strong and armed, racing over fertile fields that were not Azeroth. Hundreds of fields, hundreds of worlds, innocent people dying as a green wave that did not belong in that place snuffed the life out of it, moving on to the next and the next. Your soul is troubled, Daneth Trollbane of the Alliance, said the spirit, though his face did not move. The words were in his mind. You grieve for the fallen. Though you have come here with grief and rage in your heart, the true reasons that drive you are good and just. Be at peace. I am Bolstron, once known as the Blinding Light, and my army and I shall aid you in your struggle. The cold terror faded, replaced by an odd sort of peace. Daneth blinked. He looked again at the spirit and saw with a start that its eyes were now pure gold, and that a flare of golden light rose from its brow as well. We are in your debt, Daneth managed. It was difficult to force the words out, or to tear his eyes from the figure before him, and Daneth wondered if this was what Cheralion meant when he referred to the glory of the holy light. For Bolestron and his ghostly warriors were no longer terrifying in the least. They were glorious, golden, and gleaming and beautiful. Daneth realized he'd just been tested, and relief washed over him as he regarded the Draenei dead hovering protectively around his men. With a quick shake to clear his head, Daneth settled his shield upon one arm. Drawing his sword, he gripped the leather-wrapped pommel firmly. He glanced at Talrasar and Raelion. Once we're out, you're with me, he told them. We have to find Kurdran. Turning to the men in his charge, he said, the orcs are behind this door. They don't know we are here, and are likely expecting a dawn attack in just a few hours. We have the element of surprise. Let's use it to full advantage. Once through the door, attack the first orc you see. Shout and yell and kick things out of your way. We want them confused, panicked, and unsure of how many foes they face and where, he grinned. That will leave them as easy marks for our blows. The men nodded back and raised their fists in a silent cheer. Daneth raised his fist as well, the torch held high. Then he turned back toward the door, readied himself, and nodded for Nemeron to open it. The Akanai eased the door handle open with surprising force, thud of stone against stone, a sharp crack that echoed like thunder in the enclosed space of the ruins. For the sons of Lothar, Daneth shouted as he leapt through the opening. The door had opened onto a medium-sized tunnel not far behind the makeshift wall, and there were perhaps a dozen orcs here, lounging and sleeping and repairing gear. They glanced up, startled, as he burst in among them. Several stumbled to their feet, scrambling for weapons, but they were too slow. Daneth's first blow took out an orc in the throat, just as it was raising its head to shout in alarm. He continued the swing around, cut another orc across the forehead, and stabbed the creature through the heart while it shook its head to clear its vision. By now several of his men accompanied him. Then in came the glowing golden dead, implacable and beautiful, their weapons spectral but lethal. The orcs panicked at the sight, bellowing in terror, many of them dropping what weapons they'd raised and falling to the floor. And they were quickly dispatched. Most of the orcs here had not even been fully armed yet. Go, Daneth shouted to his men even as the last few orcs fell. Go, kill every orc you see. He glanced at Bolstron. Send your warriors with them, he said, and the Draenei commander nodded. His spirit warriors already splitting off to accompany Daneth's men. Nemeron, show me to their prisoner. The Akanai nodded and opened a door in the far wall that led Daneth and the two elven rangers through it into a shorter, narrow corridor. Grizzak followed close behind them. They passed along that into a larger room at the end, where more orcs sat or ate or slept. Fortunately, both rangers had their bows at the ready, and arrows flew from their graceful fingers, killing several orcs before the others realized they weren't alone. Then Daneth was in among them, his sword biting deep, and the screams and groans of his victims mingled with the sounds of chaos he heard from the rooms behind them, where his men were engaged in the same grisly work. Nor was Grizzak idle. The birdman launched himself forward in a strange gliding leap that carried him soundlessly behind several orcs, his long taloned hands darting forward and slashing one orc's throat open with a single swipe. A second orc turned, axe raised high, but the Arakoa ducked beneath the awkward blow and twisted around to the front, then pecked the orc's eyes out before shredding his throat as well. Whatever else the Arakoa was, Daneth thought, catching glimpses of the quick, silent carnage, he was no pacifist. This way, Nemeron urged, once the room's defenders were dead, and led them across the blood-spattered chamber to another door. The Akanai had not attacked any of the orcs himself, though his very presence and the light from his staff had seemed to confound them and make them easier to dispatch. This new door opened onto a much smaller room, and occupying half the space was a strange wooden framework, like a rough table with raised cross beams. Lashed to those beams was a short, muscular figure. Blood had dried in a pool around him and caked on his flesh. He sagged, unconscious against the restraints, and Daneth, seasoned warrior though he was, stared for a precious moment in simple horror at the atrocities perpetrated on his friend. A single heavyset orc leaned against the wall nearby, a spiked club at his side. Clearly set to guard the prisoner, It pushed off the wall as Daneth came into the room, a look of surprise on its brutish face, and its eyes widened further when the elves put a pair of arrows into its chest. A third arrow struck right between the eyes, and the orc died before it could even speak. Daneth was already hacking at the ropes binding his friend. "Curdrin," he shouted, grasping his friend. "Curdrin!" Talthrassar murmured something in his musical tongue, but he too was pale as he helped Daneth lower the wild hammer to the table. Daneth was still in shock. Both of Curdrin's arms bent in unnatural ways, and his muscular body seemed to have more welts and cuts than tattoos now. His hands and feet were utterly broken, as if crushed with a club. The only sign that he was even alive was a faint rise and fall of his chest. The dwarf looked like something they'd find in a butcher's shop. What had the orcs done to him? "Light. I don't even know where to start," Daneth said, his voice thick, staring at the bloody, broken body. "I do, if you will permit me." Daneth's head whipped up. Nemeron had come forward, his staff glowing. "I am a priest of my people. I would do what I can to heal him. But you should know, your friend's spirit clings to life only tenuously. I can try to heal him, or I can ease his crossing, if you would rather let him pass." "No," Daneth cried. "I've seen too many. Please, if you can heal him, please do it." Daneth and Talthrassar stepped back as the Draenei extended a hand. He placed it on Curdrin's head, matted with dried blood, and lifted his staff with the other hand. Closing his eyes, the Akanai began to pray. Daneth gasped softly as a pure, gentle radiance limned Nemeron's form. He didn't know the words, but they calmed his heart. The glow brightened at the Draenei's hand where it rested on Curdrin's brow. The radiance increased until it was so bright Daneth reluctantly closed his eyes against it. He'd seen this before. This being from another world, this Draenei, so strange in appearance to him. He was wielding the light, just as Turalyon did. A grunt made Daneth open his eyes. "Eh? What?" Curdrin muttered, his head tossing from side to side. "Do your worst, ye green-skinned beasties." He opened his eyes and stared straight up at the blue figure bending over him. "It's all right," Daneth assured him before he could struggle, placing a hand on the dwarf's shoulder. Nemeron stepped back, the light around him starting to fade, and smiled. Willoughby, I have done all I could. He is healed for the most part. But not all scars can be erased, nor things that are broken made as they were before." "Who's broken?" Curdrin snorted. He sat up slowly, flexing his hands and feet, touching his body. Didn't know I had that much blood in me." He peered up at Daneth. "Ah, Daneth, lad," he said when he realized he was beside him, his broad face splitting into a wide grin. "It's ye then, eh? And about bloody time. Not to worry, those beasties got no word out of me. Did ye bring me hammer?" "He should rest," the Draenei warned. "Bah, rest is for the dead," Curdrin growled. "And sometimes not even for them," Talthrassar said quietly, glancing at Nemeron. "He's a wild hammer," Daneth said to the priest. It was the best explanation he could come up with. "I brought it, Curdrin. Here." The hammer had been on Skyrie when the griffin had returned, and Daneth had possessed enough foresight to bring it with him into the tunnel. He handed over the weapon, and couldn't help grinning as the dwarf took the ponderous hammer and hefted it, though Curdrin moved more slowly and stiffly than before. "Good." Curdrin inspected the hammer quickly, then nodded his approval. "Now then, what's the plan, laddie? And who be your friends?" A nod of his head indicated Grizek and Nemeron, and Daneth didn't miss the revulsion that washed across the Akanai's face at being considered in the same breath as the Arakoa. Nemeron is an Akanai, a Draenei priest of the dead, Daneth explained quickly. He is one of the last of this place's guardians. You owe your life to him. He healed you. Ah, said Kurdran, putting the pieces together. Thank you, lad. The Wildhammers didn't forget such debts. Nemeron inclined his head graciously. And that's Grizik, the Eric Koa, Daneth continued. He hates the orcs and guided us into this place from the forest. And the plan. He raised his sword. The troops are storming the tunnel. The rest will attack soon and draw the orcs' attention away. And we will find Ner'zhul and bring his head back on a pole arm. Aye, that's a plan I'm liking. Where be this orc shaman, then? They both glanced at Nemeron, who tilted his head to one side. The most defensible room is our former prayer center, the Akanai said after a moment. That is where he is most likely to be found. Lead on, then, Daneth said. And Nemeron nodded, taking them out of that room and down a short corridor to a wide, heavy stone door covered in elaborate designs. Here, he told them, behind this door lies the prayer center. Grief shone from his eyes. We would come here to pay our respects and commune with the dead. Aurelian tried the handle. Locked, he said. Stand back, lad, Kurdran urged as he raised his hammer. This may splinter some. He was still unsteady on his feet, and Daneth bit back a protest. He wouldn't try to stop Kurdran. The Wildhammer needed to reassure himself he could still fight, and Daneth held his breath as the dwarf steadied himself, and then hurled the Stormhammer at the barrier before them. The thunderclap that sounded upon impact nearly knocked Daneth off his feet. A loud crack and a cloud of dust followed, and he waved that away. And as he waved that away, Daneth saw the blows had shattered the door. Through it he could see a large round room, and a mass of figures near its center. Several of them glanced up, surprise evident in their faces, but two did not. A massive one-eyed orc, and an older-looking orc whose face had been painted white to resemble a skull. That had to be Ner'zhul. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. Then before Daneth could begin his charge, Ner'zhul said something to the one-eyed orc, turned and slipped past him, racing through a door at the far end of the room. No you don't, Daneth cried, darting after Ner'zhul, but the one-eyed orc strode forward, blocking him. A long scar ran down the side of the large orc's face, and a patch covered that eye, but the other glared at Daneth without fear. I am Kilrog Deadeye, the orc announced proudly, in heavily accented common, pounding his chest with one hand as he raised a massive war axe with the other. I am chieftain of the Bleeding Hollow clan. Many humans I have slain. You will not be the last. I am charged with stopping you from passing, so you shall not. Daneth eyed this new foe carefully. He could see from the streaks of white in his hair and the lines on his face that this Kilrog was older than he, but his body was still heavily muscled, and he moved with the grace of a natural warrior. He seemed to have honor, too. For some reason, Daneth was prompted to respond in kind. So be it, he replied, raising his sword to salute his opponent. I am Daneth Trollbane, commander of the Alliance army. I have slain many orcs, and you won't be the last, and I will pass. With that, he charged, shield braced before him, sword already moving in a vicious downward stroke. Kilrog blocked the blow with his axe, almost wrenching the sword from Daneth's grip as the blade caught between the axe blade and handle. Daneth did not slow, however, and his shield slammed full force into Kilrog's chest. The orc staggered back a pace. Daneth took advantage of the moment to set free his sword and swing again, this time low into the side. The edge clipped Kilrog's torso just above the waist, and the Bleeding Hollow chieftain grunted as the strike drew blood. The wound did not slow him down, however, and Kilrog responded with an attack of his own. He slammed his heavy fist against Danath's shield, denting the sturdy metal and making Danath falter on his feet, then brought his axe around and up with an almost lazy arc that drove it beneath the shield's bottom edge. Danath had to jump back to avoid being disemboweled, and winced as the axe's back edge bashed into the inside of his shield, driving it hard away from him and wrenching his shield arm in the process. Danath glanced up and their eyes met. The human saw his own grudging admiration reflected in the orc's single eye as Kilrog nodded. Each found the other a worthy foe. The temperature suddenly plummeted, and Danath grinned fiercely. Cries rose up from elsewhere in the room, sounds of not only pain but fear. Once again, Bullistrong's spirit soldiers, beautiful and terrible, had come to the aid of the Alliance forces. Talthrassar and Relian were firing arrow after arrow, dropping orcs with well-placed shots. Kurdran, meanwhile, was focusing upon the orcs in the front of the room, the wild hammer single-handedly keeping them at bay with furious swings and throws of his storm hammer, his fighting spirit unbroken, although the orcs had done their damnedest to break his body. Kilrog had noticed all this as well. He roared in rage and charged. Not at Danath, but at a cluster of men off to his side. The heavy axe rose and fell with lightning speed, and two of the soldiers dropped, blood spattered everywhere, as their fellows leaped back, desperately trying to hold their own against the enraged orc leader. The Draenei spirits floated toward him with dreadful purpose, but Kilrog evaded their attacks, concentrating his efforts on the humans instead. As fast as Danath's troops cut down the other orcs, Kilrog carved a space through them in return. Suddenly Danath winced. A strong droning noise was drilling in his head. He looked everywhere but could not locate it. When he realized that it was coming from the other door, the one Ner'zhul had disappeared through moments ago, and that the edge beneath the door was glowing. The sounds were a chant. Danath realized suddenly. Between the glow and the chanting and the hairs rising on the back of his neck, Danath knew they must be working some sort of magic. By the light, was he opening the portals right now? "Get past them," he shouted to his men. "Get in the next room now." But still Kilrog blocked the way. The Bleeding Hollow chieftain was almost alone now, all his warriors cut down by the elves and dwarves and humans and Draenei working together. But he showed no signs of giving up. Danath could tell that the big orc was willing to sacrifice himself to buy Ner'zhul the time he needed for whatever magic he was working. A voice suddenly shouted from the other side of the door. Danath couldn't understand the guttural language, but he didn't need to. Whatever Ner'zhul had been trying to do, he'd done. There was a faint bursting sound, and the glow under the door intensified suddenly, filling the room with light and sound. Then it faded just as rapidly, and soon was completely gone, leaving the room even darker than it had seemed before. Kurdran managed to get past the burly orc, however. Panting heavily, he swung with all his might, straight at the now darkened door. The portal shattered with a loud crack, and the wild hammer leader kicked the fragments aside, revealing a smaller room, with a rune-scribed circle set in the stone floor. The room was empty. Kilrog had glanced toward the door as well, and now he grinned. "You did get past me, I'll give you that. Well fought, but in the end you have failed, human. My master has gone ahead to the Black Temple to cast his spell. You cannot stop him now, and worlds without end will know the trampling feet of the Horde. By the light, at least you won't follow him." Danath renewed the attack, fueled by his anger. He rained blow after blow, but each one was blocked by the wily old warrior. Kilrog grabbed the shield with one hand, shoving it aside, and slammed his axe down with the other, knocking the sword away before it could reach his belly. Then he grinned at Danath, showing the long curving tusk that sprang from his lower lip. "You will have to do better than that, human," the orc chided. Taking his axe in both hands, again he swung for Daneth's face, then reversed the direction and swung once again, forcing Daneth to step back or lose his head. In the next swing, Daneth ducked and brought his shield up hard. It smashed into Kilrog's arms, forcing them up as well, and threw the orc off balance. Then Daneth thrust, his sword catching the orc in the belly and sinking deep. He was almost surprised that he'd managed it. With a roar, Kilrog slammed his forearms down, sending the shield crashing into Daneth's head and staggered back. He was bleeding heavily from the gut wound, but that only seemed to enrage him. Raising his axe again, Kilrog brought it down squarely atop Daneth's shield, the heavy blade sinking deep into the protective metal. He yanked back, and the shield tore away from its straps, leaving Daneth defenseless. "Now we face each other blade to blade," Kilrog told him, ripping the sundered shield from his axe blade and tossing it aside. "And only one will live to sing of the battle." "Fine by me," Daneth muttered back through clenched teeth. Taking his sword in both hands, he ran forward, straight for Kilrog, sword held high over one shoulder. But just as the orc chieftain stepped up to meet him, Daneth stopped short, using his momentum to pivot on one foot instead, one hand releasing the sword and the other arcing outwards so that his strike came from the opposite side, Kilrog's blind side. The flashing blade took the surprised orc in the neck, sliding through his throat, and Kilrog toppled, his axe falling from his hands as they flew up to stop the blood spurting from his wound. But the bleeding hollow chieftain was grinning as he dropped to his knees. "By my blood, the horde lives," the orc managed to gasp out, his voice a bubbling whisper. "Ancestors, I come." Then his eyes glazed over, and Kilrog Deadeye toppled sideways, to land heavily upon the carved stone floor of the prayer room. Daneth was panting, but lifted his sword in salute to a fallen foe. "Well done, lad," Curdran said, stepping up beside Daneth and patting him on the arm. But Daneth shook his head. "I failed," he said bitterly, glancing down at Kilrog's body. "He was right. He did what he was supposed to do. He gave them enough time to escape." Daneth scowled and gritted his teeth. Whatever spell they used transported them straight to some place he called the Black Temple. "How can we possibly stop them now? I don't even know where this place is." The Arakoa turned, his eyes bright. "Grizikno can take you there. You know where." "Sir," one of Daneth's men burst into the room, followed by Nemeron and the flowing, drifting forms of the Draenei dead. "We have the orcs on the run, sir. Some of them have fled deeper into the tunnels, though." He paused, clearly expecting a reply, and seemed puzzled when Daneth did not respond. "Sir?" Curdran nudged Daneth. "You're in charge, lad," the Wildhammer reminded him quietly. "Even if you feel you failed, you cannot let your troops know it, eh?" He was right, of course. Daneth nodded and straightened. Then he met the soldier's eyes. "Let the orcs run," he said. "We know where Ner'zhul went, and we're going to follow him. We'll be making for a place called the Black Temple." The Black Temple. Daneth turned at the anger he heard in Bolstrand's spectral voice, and saw the spirit glowering, though not at him. "That was once Karabor, our holiest place. But the orcs defiled it, as they defile all they touch." His hands tightened on his glowing hammer, which was still completely clean despite the orcs he had slain with it. "I pray when you reach it, you will drive the orcs from its hallowed ground." Daneth nodded. "That's the plan. Thank you for your help. It has been an honor fighting alongside you." "For us as well," Bolstrand replied, bowing. You and your alliance are noble warriors and honorable people. I wish you well, Danis Trollbane. We go to our rest until summoned again. Then he and his warriors faded away, leaving only soft glows behind, until those diffused as well. Danis turned to Nemeron. On impulse, he said, "Come with us. This is no place to live, and you can serve your people more by leaving here and returning to the world. We could even take you to Azeroth with us if you liked." Nemeron smiled. "Truly, your world must be a wondrous place to have produced such people," he complimented. "And I appreciate your offer. But no, my place is here. Our dead remain in this world, honorably laid to rest in Auchenduin, or scattered in the forest, even paving the path the orcs misnamed the Path of Glory. Here they lie in Draenor, and here I stay to tend to them. The Holy Light has placed us here for a reason, and someday it will triumph over all. Until then, I rejoice in the knowledge that I have aided you, and that you and your people carry light as well. Go forth, and let your courage and strength drive the orcs before you like chaff before the strong wind. And who knows, perhaps one day our peoples will indeed battle such evil side by side." He hesitated. "A favor before you go." Danith nodded. "Name it." "Do not let that one undo what the light has wrought. A noble and fierce warrior he is, to be sure, but wisdom marks a warrior as much as bravery." He indicated Kurdran, who scowled and colored slightly in the midst of his worry. Danith managed a small smile. "I'll do what I can, but you see how stubborn he is. Bah, the lot of ye." "Come on, walking wounded," Danith said to Kurdran. "We've a black temple to take." And with a final nod to the Akanai, Danis Trollbane headed back into the corridors of the City of the Dead, hoping that Nemeron's prayers for the Alliance would be answered.
You can